What if the twists and turns in life led you from dropping out of school to piloting massive riverboats on the Mississippi, and then to owning a coffee company? Chris Nance's journey is anything but ordinary. From navigating powerful currents to mastering the art of kooning oysters, his story is filled with hard work, adventure, and unexpected opportunities. Get ready to dive into the incredible journey of Chris Nance. Welcome to Journey with Jake. This is a podcast about adventure and how through our adventures we can overcome the challenges of life that come our way. While I expect you will learn some things about different adventures, this show will entertain you. Each episode will feature a different guest or guests as they share experiences and stories from the different adventures they have been on. Not only will you be entertained, but you will also hear the failures and trials each guest faces and what they have done or are doing to overcome the hardships that come their way. My goal is to take each of us on a journey through the experiences of my guests with the hope that you'll be entertained and inspired to overcome your day-to-day challenges. After all, it's not all about the destination as it is about the journey. To the show. I'm Jake Bushman, your host of Journey with Jake, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm especially excited for you to hear my conversation with Chris Nance. It's a story of resilience, hard work, and unexpected twists. Before we dive in, just a couple of quick things. First, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode of Journey with Jake. Second, if you'd like to connect with me and see clips from past, current, and upcoming episodes, follow me on Instagram at Journey with Jake Podcast. It's also a great way to get to know me on a more personal level. And finally, Journey with Jake is proud to be part of the Podmatch Podcast Network. If you're looking for incredible shows on just about any topic, check out podmatch.com/network. You'll find a fantastic directory of podcasts across all kinds of categories. Now, back to my guest, Chris Nance. His journey is nothing short of remarkable. From dropping out of school to dealing with his father's incarceration, Chris had to fight for everything he's achieved. Today, he's a successful riverboat pilot and part owner of Backbone Coffee. For those of you watching on YouTube, I want to acknowledge that the video quality for Chris in the first half isn't great. We both noticed it, but let's just say my tech skills weren't quite up to speed at the moment. Luckily, it does improve in the second half, so I appreciate your patience. All right, let's jump into my conversation with Chris Nance. All right. I'm excited today. I have Chris Nance. You go by Chris or Christopher?
Go by Chris, yeah.
Chris.
And
all right,
a lot of people
perfect.
call me Nance. Yeah.
Okay, all right. A lot of people go by the last name. They say, hey, Nance. Hey, Nance, what's going on, Nance?
Yeah, I don't know why. I guess, I don't know. Even when I was a kid, they called me Nancy for years for whatever reason. But yeah, I go by Chris mostly.
All right,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
Chris.
I just embraced it and it stuck.
Yeah, that's funny. I love that. Well, hey, welcome to Journey with Jake.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to talk to you. I was reading your profile about who you are and what you're all about, and I was struck because I'm like, all right, I've never had a riverboat pilot on the podcast, so I'm excited to talk to you about that. You mentioned something about koonin oysters. I have no idea what that even means, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Before we dive into all that, if you don't mind, Chris, give me a little background on who you are, where you're from, just so we have a little background on who Chris is.
Yeah, so I grew up just a little south of New Orleans, homeschooled. My dad was a riverboat pilot. My granddad was a riverboat pilot. My dad was a commercial fisherman before he drove ships, and so was my granddad. So I guess I followed in those footsteps as my dad and my granddad. And mom, stay-at-home mom, she's a really wild human, very abnormal. Homeschooled like 5 kids in a time that homeschooling was not the thing. Although I feel like homeschooling is kind of coming back around. Yeah, dropped out of homeschooling, quote unquote, after Katrina. I think I was like 13. My mom was just overwhelmed and just stopped school altogether. After that, dad went to prison for tax evasion, oddly enough. Yeah, and so that's actually how I ended up working in the oyster fields was mom was overwhelmed, dad was in prison, and I wasn't going to school. So I just went on a boat. Did that for a couple years, then started driving tugboats or working on tugboats, wanted to follow my dad's footsteps on ships, and that led me to go to Texas A&M Maritime. I got a degree in maritime transportation, finished that, came back, was a tugboat captain for a couple years, and then got into the pilots, which is kind of a miracle. It's extremely hard to get into the pilot association, and I got really lucky. Got into the pilots. I've been driving ships for about 5 years now, and yeah. Other than that, I guess what I did growing up was driving boats, working on oyster fishing boats and shrimp boats, and I hunted and fished a lot. And in the past couple of years, I just spearfish a bunch and I hunt elk. And now I got 3 kids and I'm married, so that takes up a bunch of my time too.
Wow. Okay. How old are your
So
kids?
I got a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old, and a 3-month-old. Yeah, 2 of my kids are like 11 months apart. So
Wow.
Irish
Wow.
twins. Yeah.
Irish twins. You got your hands full.
Yeah. Yeah. Is
Wow.
my
Okay.
video going real
It's
soft?
it's gone. Yeah, it's gone a little blurry on me here,
I
but it
don't know
might just
why.
be. It might just be the. Is it bad on your end too?
Very bad on my end.
Yeah, it went like. But usually that's just
Yeah.
because when we're recording, it kind of does that. But usually I see it on my end.
No, it's like I can't even see my face anymore.
Yeah, you're definitely blurry. I wonder if you should turn it off, turn it back on, see if that might work.
Let me try that.
I mean, I'm getting a notice saying actual recording is higher quality, so it might be okay.
Oh, okay.
That happens to me. I've had some where I can hardly see the people, and then when I play it back, it's fine. But it
Yeah.
was weird.
Hopefully that's the case.
I think that might be it. It just might be once we hit record, it might have it done that to kind of upload. Anyway. All right, well, we'll just
Interesting.
keep going
Either
then.
way. Yeah, might as well.
Yeah. Well, Chris, okay, wild stuff from you, first of all. So you said one of 5 kids, is that right?
Yeah, I'm the fourth in line of 5. I got one little
You're the
brother.
fourth. Okay. You're the fourth in line of
Yeah.
5. Katrina happened. You said your mom got overwhelmed and just kind of was it
Yeah.
her stopping teaching, or was it you deciding I don't want to do this anymore? Kind of how was it?
It was really like my mom had difficulties with school in our area growing up because my older brother and my sister went to school when they were young, and the school systems around us were pretty bad, and she just had so many problems with the school system that she decided to homeschool us. And my dad, did pretty well driving ships, so she's like, I don't need to work, if I'm going to take care of these kids. I just want really, she said she wanted good, hardworking kids. And she was like, I feel like the education will come after. And honestly, she's pretty correct. We still did schoolwork growing up, but it wasn't the main focus. Kind of work and yeah, just being, good moral people was more of a focus for my mom than necessarily schooling. And when Katrina hit, it was kind of weird because Katrina hit and our house was fine. It's the only hurricane my family's ever evacuated for. And we were south of New Orleans. Um, and but everything else around the city kind of went south, as most people know. Katrina was pretty bad. My dad, after Katrina, my dad was responsible. My dad and my now association, we were responsible for all the ship movements on the Mississippi River from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. So, I mean, he just worked for months straight. And she had 5 kids. She was living in Birmingham, or we were living in Birmingham with my grandma. And I don't know, I guess just all of it was a little overwhelming. And she was just like, school's on you. And at that time, I was really young. It was a strange thing for her to do. It worked out. She did exactly what she needed to do. She's got, I think my siblings are awesome. They're all very productive family people, very hardworking, and yeah, so it worked out. And 4 of the 5 of us all have college degrees. So I mean, she was kind of correct. The schooling kind of came. None of us can spell worth a damn. But other than that, I mean, we're doing all right.
Yeah, no, for sure. The fact you said you got a degree, the other thing that happened to you when you were young, you said your dad went to prison for tax evasion. How long
Yeah.
was he in prison? How long was he in prison? How
uh,
did that affect you?
You know what's funny? Out of all of my siblings, I kind of thought it was funny. I was just like, it's life. Like, we just took it on the chin. Like my little brother, it affected him. He was, 3 years younger than me. It definitely affected his personality a little more. It put a lot of stress on my oldest brother because I mean he more or less had to step in and take more of the weight. But my older brother didn't live with us. My older brother and my sister, they were gone. So it was me, one of my older brothers, the one right before me, and my little brother. And this was a couple years after Katrina. But me and my older brother, Matt, so I mean, by the time my dad was in prison, all of us had left. I was 15 or 14. My older brother, Matt, was 16, 17. And my sister and my brother had been gone for years. So really the only one that stayed in the house was my little brother. But I mean, I was a 15-year-old and I spent in a 3-year period, I spent over 800 days. Yeah, 3 or 4 year period, I spent over 800 days on a shrimp boat. So, I mean, I kind of lived on the shrimp boat. But yeah, he went to tax evasion, or he went to prison for tax evasion because I guess he thought it's kind of a funny story, but not really. Yeah, he didn't pay taxes for 15 years.
Wow.
And my position as a riverboat pilot, we're kind of under a microscope politically in Louisiana. And when my dad, whenever I don't know the details of exactly how it happened, but essentially the judge that trialed his case made an example of him. So she threw the book at him. I think primarily to deter any other riverboat pilot from doing it again. It worked. It worked. I mean, all my business partners, although some of them may or may not have tax issues, like nobody's gone to prison since then. So that's good. But yeah, so they threw the book at him and they gave him 2 years for tax
Okay.
evasion. Yeah. And
Wow.
it was kind of
Okay.
funny. The same month that he went to prison for, a fraction of the tax bill, the guy Blade, the actor that played Blade, I don't know if you ever seen that movie. I can't think of his name right now.
It's not Wesley Snipes, is it? I can't.
I just
Yeah.
remember that he owed like 40 million and he got 4 months in the same like 2 month period. So we were like, I know my dad didn't know 40 million. So it was
Yeah.
just the judge at like just threw the book at him and he was gone for 2 years. And
Wow.
we had a blast. We'd go visit my dad in prison and go back to working in New Orleans.
Wow.
I didn't mind it. Most of us didn't mind it. My little brother minded it.
Yeah,
Mom
your little
didn't like
brother.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure your mom. I'm sure your
Mom
mom
didn't
didn't
mom
appreciate
didn't
it.
like it.
Oh wow, wow! What a crazy childhood. The fact that you at 14, 15 are going off on these oyster boats
Yeah.
for all the. I mean that's. I mean I have a 15-year-old daughter. It's like she's not going anywhere. She's still at home every night. It's just it's different. The way you were raised and stuff is just different. Your mom raised you to be hardworking, productive citizens. That's what you were doing. So on the oyster boat, koonin, yeah, what is koonin oyster? Because I saw, that's what it says. You said you were koonin oysters before you could drive. What the heck does that mean?
Literally. Yeah. So I'll just tell the whole commercial thing. So I was pretty independent, but my mom didn't just, let me go live with random people. My dad went to, summer camp. I forget what he called it, Camp Fed. He went to a federal prison. So he went to Camp Fed. And right after he left, my dad's high school buddies who he grew up with and we hunted with and fished with, they more or less saw that we needed somebody to take us do stuff. And so, I mean, it was 1 or 2 months after he had left, they took me to go goose hunting at the mouth of the Mississippi River. And I had a blast. And I guess they just saw that I worked really hard. Goose hunting in Venice can be physically demanding, you know, and I guess they just saw that I worked hard. And they were at the end of the hunt, it was 2 or 3 days. At the end of the hunt, they're like, hey, I know you're not in school, you want to come work on oyster boat? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And I had growing up, I had heard stories of these guys and they were very manly. How do you say that? They had some wild stories
Mm-hmm.
of fighting it was crazy. Like the oyster industry, and when you're working oysters, people get really touchy feely about boundaries. So there was all these stories about fighting and just working hard. And so I had admired these guys and just thinking they were the most, bad to the bone guys ever. Commercial fishing guys. They're just gnarly guys. And so when they invited me to go work for them, I jumped on the opportunity. And yeah, it started from there. And they started me out koonin oysters. And the term koonin oysters, there's two types of oyster fishing, like two types of ways that you harvest oysters here in Louisiana. You dredge oysters, which is, you've got a fairly large boat. They come in all different sizes, but big enough to have an engine, and they drag a rake, a dredge. So
Okay.
they're usually about, depending on the size of the boat, but they're usually about 3 feet wide and 4 foot long, and they're shaped like a triangle. And at the bottom of the triangle, there's a bunch of teeth. And these teeth, they break off, like the teeth drag down. And so you're dragging these teeth across the bottom, and the oysters pop off and into a basket that's on top of that
Gotcha.
rake, right? It's hard to explain that any better than that. But essentially, you just drag it across the bottom and it picks up the oysters. And then you use a winch, you winch it up, you dump it on a table, you throw the rake back in the water, keep dragging it, and then you clean the table. And then you clean each individual oyster, you throw it in a basket, you sack it up, you repeat until you've loaded the boat. And the way that you would harvest oysters is koonin. When you dredge, it's in deep water. So you need at least 2 feet of water, at least, depending on the size of the boat. Like there's styles of boats that have 3 or 4 foot of draft. So you need 6 foot of water. It just depends on what type of bottom you're working. And the koonin oysters is when you have beds that are dry half the year. So when the tide goes out, the oysters are pretty much sticking up out of the mud, and the tide comes back in. And so they're on the edge of that tidal range where like half the year or half the day they're out of the water, the other half the day, depending on where the tide's at, they're in under the water. Well, you can't drive a dredge boat up in there. So the only way to harvest those is to get little flat boats, about 10 to 15 feet long. You put your chest waders on or your wetsuit on. You get a chip and hammer, which looks like a tomahawk, really. And yeah, you just go out there and you crawl around on your hands and knees. You can't stand up. There's no standing up, because if you stand up, you're going to go to your crotch in mud.
You just start sinking? Is that what you do if you
Yeah,
stand
yeah,
up?
the mud's, yeah. I say there's no bottom. There's pretty much no bottom. So, I mean, you stand up, you're going to your crotch pretty much at any time. Now, if you get closer to the bank where the marsh grass is, you can obviously stand on the marsh grass, but where most of these oysters are, it's just deep mud. And so the term koonin is like, if you drive through the marshes down here, you'll see these guys pulling these little 10-foot boats, and they're crawling on their hands and knees, and they're cleaning oysters with a hatchet. And it looks like from afar, like a really big raccoon cleaning his dinner.
Gotcha.
Right. Yeah. And so you pull this little boat around, which is, it starts out light, but by the end of the day, you're pushing 1,500 pounds of rock across flat mud.
Wow.
So it was pretty labor intensive.
Yeah.
So
And was it kind of first light to when it got dark? I mean, is that kind of how long you're out there doing this?
no, you had to get the oysters on the truck by the end of the day, and the trucks were usually loaded by like 3, 4 o'clock. You got to start loading, because oysters. You really want to get oysters on ice pretty quick. In the winter, you can leave oysters on the boat for 2 days, and they're gonna be fine. As long as the temperature's low enough, oysters will be fine on the boat for max 2 days. Like 2 days, you're kind of like, probably
Pushing
don't
it a
want to
little
go to
bit.
market with that one, right? In the summer, the law is you got to get them on ice or in refrigeration within 4 hours. So, and that law was there when I was working oysters back in 2000. I don't even remember. I don't remember the date, but it's always been that way. So in the summer months, when the temperature, the wildlife fishery, they'll test the bacteria in the water. And when the bacteria gets to a certain point, which is usually has something to do with the temperature, they'll pretty much just put out a notice like all oysters has to be on ice or in refrigeration after 4 hours at a certain point. And when they put that requirement in there, you pretty much stop. We stopped oyster fishing because it wasn't worth it. You have to build refrigeration on the boat, which was just
To
a
make it
lot of
work.
overhead, and you got to run
Yeah.
generators in it. It was just too much. It was too much work. So luckily in the summer months, shrimping would kick off. So we would work the winter months oyster fishing. And then when the summer months hit, we went to shrimping. And that was kind of the cycle.
Okay.
And then we would shrimp into the winter. And when we weren't shrimping, we were spearfishing, and when we weren't koonin oysters, we were shooting ducks. And that's pretty much how the first couple of years of my life. Yeah, it was so funny because these bad Northwesterns would come in, and it would be too rough or just too nasty to go oyster fishing, so we'd go duck hunting. And then the weather would kind of cool off a little bit, or we get a bluebird day. I'm like, all right, we're gonna go to work, and we kind of work that cycle where we duck hunt, and then weather's nice, let's go back to work, and then because when the weather comes in, the duck hunting gets better. So nasty
That's
weather, duck hunting's
interesting.
better. So it's like it was so perfect. It was an awesome.
I was going to say the duck hunting for you then was the duck hunting like, oh, this is like our leisure fun thing to do is duck hunt.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was just, and my bosses that I worked for, like I was their right hand guy, so we were always working or we were hunting.
Oh, I love it.
And I would go home, but really not, I hardly ever went home. It was kind of funny because, I'm 15. By the time I was finished, I was 18, 19, when I was finished working with them. But over those years, they would always laugh because my mom would never call. We'd go 2 weeks, and my bosses are like, hey, man, you talk to your mom? And I'm like, I know. Is she okay? They're like, man, your mom loves you, but she's got a funny way of showing it. But we'd always laugh. They were like, your
Wow.
mom is very strange. Because, yeah, she was an interesting character. She is an
Wow.
interesting character. She's awesome. But when we were
Yeah.
growing up, it was so funny because, like, I was never allowed to go sleep over at someone's house ever growing up. I was slept at my house, and that was it. But I was allowed to drive around with a four wheeler and a shotgun and go miles away from my house. So it was like she was really cool with abnormal things that we did, but she was not cool with the normal 11-year-old, 10-year-old activities of like sleepovers. So,
I
so
always,
I mean,
people in Louisiana, I mean, because Louisiana to me, I look at, people like you who are from Louisiana, it's almost like a foreign country within our country. Because
yeah, yeah,
the way you guys are raised, on the river in the swamps, and it's just it's amazing, and that's why I'm so excited to talk to you, and I love hearing
yeah.
this.
Yeah, and another way that it's almost a foreign country is if in the maritime industry, we communicate with radios. It's the only way you talk to other vessels. If you're working the West Coast, you're working the East Coast, you might get accents, but if you come from the East Coast or West Coast and then you come work in the Gulf or you come up the Mississippi River, it's almost impossible to understand some of these guys on the radio. It's almost like another language. And every time I've got like someone that's coming up or trading underneath me or just trying to get on the river and we're listening to the radio, half the time they're like, what did that guy say? It's just that the accent here is very wild as well.
For sure, I would love that, and I can't hardly tell that you even have an accent. I mean,
Yeah,
what?
I did that on purpose. Yeah, I did. I really did. When I left, so I used to have a really thick accent. Obviously, when I was commercial fishing, that was the only accent I heard. So, I mean, that's the accent I spoke in. I got on the tugboats and then I decided to go to A&M. And when I did that, I just made a conscious decision to like not have that accent. Because I mean, there's always some who love it and then some that don't. And then, sometimes people, question your intelligence with that accent. And so, I was trying to go get a higher education degree. And I was already struggling with spelling, and I didn't do a whole lot of, classical education growing up. And so I just decided like that's a hurdle that I don't want to have to deal with. So I just cleared up my accent.
Good for you. Wow, that's impressive in and of itself. The other thing that's impressive is the fact that you went to A&M after dropping out of homeschool. You stopped going to school at 13 or
Yeah.
14. How did that happen? Because how do you all of a sudden get to A&M? Did you end up getting a GED? What did you do?
Yeah. So I was working on the oyster boats with my bosses. My bosses were Poogie and Henry. And so Poogie's kind of a unique name. I don't even know.
I've
I
never
don't even know
heard
how to
that name
spell it,
before.
to be honest. Poogie? I'm not sure. But yeah, so I was working with Poogie and Henry, and they were awesome mentors for me. They were just they are. I mean, they're still part of my life. But they never really let me partake with some of the ignorance that was going on in the industry. I worked with a lot of unique characters, from Hondurans to crackheads to, you know, that was pretty much it. I worked with a lot of like South American guys who were awesome, and a lot of crackheads who were also awesome. They were just on crack. Like we were. It's hard to get somebody to work oysters, and they're not all crackheads, and they're not all Hondurans. If you make it in the oyster field and you got a half a head screwed on, you're gonna do okay. There's good living in the oyster industry, but if you're working for someone else, the likelihood of it is like that's not entirely true. That's not entirely true. I know a bunch of great guys that were working, but either way, they didn't let me partake in any shenanigans. And they were always like making sure that I was doing something else, and that I saw the other side of the industry, that it wasn't just work, that there was administrative things, and that one of the reasons that they were successful was they weren't just using their back to make money, but they were using their head to make money. And they were kind of the ones that were like, you really need to go get a GED, bare minimum. And so, yeah, they told me to go get a GED when I think I was 16. Like, I think 16 in Louisiana, you can get a GED. And so they're like, hey, and it was probably part of my mom too. My mom too was probably like, hey, you got to go get a GED, just because you got to have something.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I got a GED when I was 16, 17, and I was not really planned. I never really planned on going to college. I was just going to work. But after about 4 years of really hard labor, and my mentors kind of like, hey, this is a really hard life. You want to make sure that you can survive without breaking your back for 40 years. Um, I started thinking beyond just working oysters or working commercial fishing or just driving a tugboat. And so I started working on tugboats the day I turned 18. Actually, the day after. I turned 18 on a Sunday, and my dad's birthday present to me was a job on a tugboat. And it was the same company that my granddad worked for, my dad and all my uncles worked for, my brother, like when I left this company, all five of my siblings, myself included, worked for this company. And the four of them still work there. So it was kind of like you did commercial fishing, which I was the only one of my siblings to really do commercial fishing. And then you go work on tugboats. And then hopefully you can drive ships. Hopefully you can, pilot ships on the river. And so I was working on a tugboat for a couple of years. And in my head, I was gonna really, no, I was telling people, like, they'd ask me like, hey, are you going to try to be a pilot? And I'm like, yeah, I want to be a pilot. One of my dad's, let me back up a little bit. When I was working on the tugboats, I had never been on a ship, and I was real young when my dad went to prison. When my dad got out of prison, they forced him to retire. So he was retired, but he wasn't a pilot anymore. So I never had any opportunities to see what it was like on the other side of that fence, and to look at the river from the wheelhouse of a ship. I only knew it from the wheelhouse of a tugboat. And my dad wasn't there to, bring me to kind of let me see what that world was about. But one of my dad's best friends saw me on a tugboat and said, like, hey, do you want to, you want to come do a ride along and come ride a ship with me. At that point, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a pilot because there was a bit of bad blood towards the pilot association. I kind of forced my dad out, and that was here nor there, and water under the bridge by now. But I wasn't really sure if I wanted to be a pilot, but I'd never seen a ship bridge. So I was like, yeah, I'd love to. And I remember the day I got on a ship with Captain Billy Lanterns, I was like, this is what I'm doing. It's like, I don't care if y'all murdered my old man. This is what I'm doing, And so I was like, I love this. And from that point on, like, that was my goal, was to be a riverboat pilot. And I'm about 18 at the time. I had my GED. And my initial plan was I was going to do what they call hawse piping. Hawse piping is a term that you pretty much work your way up. And in the industry, before there was programs like A&M, and they got 6 more schools in the US where you can go for a 4-year degree, get a bachelor's in maritime transportation. And when you graduate, you're an officer on a ship. You're the lowest officer, but you're an officer on a ship. And you kind of jump that hawse piping period to where you're never a subordinate. You jump right into the officer position. I didn't want to really do that. I wanted to work on boats and then work my way into the pilotage. But the industry was changing a lot at that time. And we were, as an association and as a pilots specific in the industry, everybody was shifting towards maritime grads. There was no set rule that you couldn't hawse pipe at the time, but there was a couple senior captains on the tugs and a couple senior pilots that were like, hey, you're 18 years old. You have no dependents. You have a lot of freedom. You really need to go get a degree because there's no telling how long you're going to take to get into the association. And there's really no telling, what rules are going to change in the coming years. And I grew up very insecure about my education. I've always, well, back then I was very insecure about my education. I was like, there's just no way I can make it. There's no way I'm going to be able to get through college. I didn't do school. I thought I should have, it's funny, I should have failed my GED. The only reason I didn't fail is because the administrator forgot to set the clock and he gave us an extra 2 hours to take it. So obviously I could just go back and take it again, but the time that I passed it, the only reason I passed was because I got an extra 2 hours, which is bad. It worked out great for me. But yeah, so I was really insecure about going to college, and there was one particular captain that I was working under on the tugs, and I don't think it was a whole lot of convincing. We were sitting on the tugs. I was at the time taking developmental classes at a community college in Louisiana. And so, there's a funny story when I started that community college about my very first classes. But I was already taking developmental classes because my bosses said, hey, you might as well start taking classes. I was like, okay, sure. It seems productive, but it wasn't really for the pilotage. I just was taking it because they had said it was
just to do it.
Yeah. And, but I'm on this tug. I was on the Point Clear. And the captain's like, what do you plan on doing? What is your plans? I said, I want to be a riverboat pilot. He's like, how do you plan to do it? I was like, I'm going to hawse pipe it. And he's like, man, you're an idiot. He told me that to my face. I was like, why? Like, I'm going to hawse pipe and I'm going to, I'm going to college. Like, where do you say this? He's like, you need to go to A&M. I was like, I can't make it at A&M. He's like, sure you can. He's like, I went to A&M. Plenty of people went through A&M. He's like, you could definitely do it. And so I was like, oh, okay. Like, I just accepted, like, he said I could do it. I was like, yeah, sure, I can do it. And right there, he's like, we went online on the boat computer. He put my application in. We wrote like 5 essays right there on the computer. We sent it off. I called my mom. I said, hey, Mom, I'm going to go to college at A&M. She's like, awesome. I'll start saving up for your college fund. I'm like, Mom, I'm 18. You should have did that a long time ago. We just laughed at it. She's like, yeah, but I never thought you would go. I'm like, thanks for the confidence, Mom. But she's like, no, I just thought you were going to be successful elsewhere. But yeah, I was like, I said, "Hey, I'm gonna go to college at A&M. I already submitted my application. Semester starts in 2 weeks." And I said, "I'm gonna get off this boat on Tuesday, and I'm gonna go to Galveston, and I'm gonna start taking classes at the community college next to A&M." And yeah, I did. So I was on the boat for another 3 or 4 days. I got off on a Tuesday morning, drove to Galveston, signed up for classes, got an apartment, and I lived in Galveston with less than 7 days from deciding to go to A&M. Wasn't
Wow.
accepted, but I just so another thing that I had known, and this captain had told me was like, if you take classes at this other school, the transfer into A&M was much easier, which really isn't true. But at the time, that was the information that I was going off of. So yeah, I had my application in at A&M. I mean, the other school was a community college, so they accept you no matter what. And I mean, I lived in Galveston that following Friday, and so I wasn't even accepted, and I didn't get accepted for another semester. Yeah, and looking back, like one of the things I learned, it's like I learned through A&M that really all you got to do is work really hard. Like I couldn't spell, I could barely read. I was good at math, but that was primarily just because I was just always naturally good at math. But like I couldn't spell and I could hardly read when I got to A&M. But I just worked really hard. Like I treated it like a 12-hour shift job. At one point I was taking 31 hours in one semester. Most of my semesters I
Wow.
was taking 25 to 28. And what I
Wow.
learned was I was just like, I just work harder and I networked really well. Like I met friends and they would tell me like, hey, you can take a class over at Southeastern Texas or West Texas College and community colleges here. And I could just transfer classes. And so I did it in 3 years. I did 2.5 years a semester. And then I had one full semester at sea. But yeah, like I just worked really hard. And obviously, if you work long enough, like you'll learn how to read, you'll learn how to write, you'll learn. And another thing I showed up realizing was that you don't, there was no expectation for you to know very much. It was like, if you're here, like the point of this class was to teach you. So I was
Right.
like, you don't have to know anything. I mean, obviously, if you're in, a higher physics class, you might want physics 1 and 2 before you went to, advanced physics, right? But I mean, for most of my classes, there was no expectation for you to know very much. But it was kind of funny. My very first class at A&M, I almost failed it because I misspelled the word captain like 7 times. Yeah, it was a real, there was a captain there that was very hard on the new cadets, the new students at A&M. But once he found out I wasn't completely incompetent, he laid off me. But he failed me like halfway through the semester because I kept misspelling words. Which I'm like, Cap, I'm not in spelling school. I'm in captain school. I'm in maritime school. I want to learn how to drive a boat, not not spell the word captain. And he's like, no, you got to learn how to spell. I was like, but yeah. But yeah,
Wow.
so my A&M time it was good. I really loved it. I learned a lot. And it was kind of hard, but it really, looking back, like I remember sitting there thinking like, man, this is really hard, but it's a lot easier than pushing 1,500 pounds of oysters across a mud flat. And so I kind of kept remembering that.
Yeah, just kind of
So,
looking at that. Something you talked about that I think's important through all of this, I've kind of caught on to it, is you've had good people in your life who've kind of helped guide you along the way.
oh my gosh.
What'd you
Yes.
say? Poogie? What was the guy? Poogie and the other guy?
Poogie.
And then,
Yeah.
I
Poogie.
mean,
Poogie
the
and
first time you
Henry.
went, yeah, Poogie and Henry, the first time you went onto that boat and you're like, this is what I
Yep.
want to do, the captain there,
Yeah.
the tugboat captain, said, hey, you could do this. When you're in your mind, you were like, no, I can't do this. I couldn't even
Yeah.
graduate homeschool. I had to get my GED. He's like, no, you can
Right.
go to A&M. You can do this. So I've been impressed by, you've had
Yeah.
great influences along the way.
I've been extremely blessed with strong men that spoke life into me and was just encouraging in whatever stage I was in. Poogie and Henry was the beginning for sure. Without them, I don't know there's no telling what direction, but they definitely cultivated this foundation in which I picked a direction. When I picked a direction, there was multiple, captains. Like Billy Lanner's my dad's good friend. He was one of those guys that would call me about once a semester and say, "Hey, I mean, how are you doing? Are you eating? Like, are you making it through school? How do you feel about this direction?" There was another captain, Mitch Oakley, who right when I decided I was going to A&M, he was a part of the tugboat company, but he was a part of the union that I was in for the tugboat. And he taught like safety, and he taught a bunch of classes for the union. And he had done a bunch of executive work for an oil company up in the Northeast years before. Fantastic teacher, fantastic mentor. And he also was one that would call, how are you, what's your direction? How do you want to get there? And it wasn't that they call, I didn't talk to these gentlemen very often, but every time I talked to them, they made sure like, hey, what's your focus? What are you focused on? How do you want to get there? Is there anything like, is there a step that you need help from me? And I guess that was just, they helped cultivate a direction for me and help me like see through the weeds of like, where do I want to go?
For sure.
And then talk life into me and then make sure that I was a good human being at the same time.
And
So
it's nice
yeah.
that you had that influence. And yeah, it doesn't need to be every week, where you, like you said, once a semester you were getting that help along the way, which I think is huge. And
Right.
and I look at that because I've had people who've done that for me along my life, and it's like hopefully I can repay that and do that for others as well, as we move
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
definitely.
I'm very thankful for that, definitely. And I like to think that that definitely rubbed off in a way that when I have people coming up with me that are just training, like I remember people just being very helpful no matter what. Like they were in it for no cost, like for no benefit to themselves.
Right.
And so I definitely enjoy that part now that I'm a seasoned guy in this industry. It is very enjoyable. I see the enjoyment I guess the only thing that those guys got were they just helped somebody that was already working in a direction and they helped them along. And that's an enjoyable thing.
Definitely.
So, and I'm
All
very
right.
thankful that they did it for me and they taught me how to do it. Hopefully, I guess. I
Yeah,
think I'm
no,
okay
for sure.
at teaching nowadays.
I would imagine you would
Yeah.
be, for sure. Uh, I want to talk a little bit about the Riverboat Pilot. I want to talk about, and you're wearing a shirt right there that says Backbone Coffee Company, which I definitely want to
Yeah.
talk about. But before we do that, you are currently a riverboat pilot, if I'm not
I am.
mistaken.
Yeah.
I got to hear at least a story or so, one or two stories about any kind of crazy experiences as a riverboat pilot. And when I think of a
Definitely.
riverboat pilot, are you driving like those barges? Like, what is it that you drive? What is it that you're
So
captaining?
So a little about what I do. My association, we control all foreign flag ship movements, so seagoing ships from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. And when a foreign flag ship, meaning it was built and crewed by another nation, they legally can't operate in US waters. And that goes across industry. If you were to go into Japan or, China, Australia, the UK, they have the same laws. When you go into their waters, when you hit the sea buoy, a representation from that country gets on board and helps navigate the ship to wherever it's going.
Gotcha.
And so that's my primary job, is to help get the ship safely from point A to point B and be that representation of the country. And so by the time they get to me though, they've been with two other riverboat pilot associations, because I go from New Orleans up to Baton Rouge. And so yeah, so when it gets to us, I come on board, I share responsibility with the captain, but I primarily control the movements of the ship. And I don't like, there's no steering wheel that I'm operating. Like I give commands to the crew on the ship. I give rudder commands and engine commands. I do all the communication with other vessels. And then when we approach a dock and we're going to dock the ship, I give all the commands to the tugboats that'll come on and they'll help us come alongside the dock. I'm the hub of information when it comes to the tugs, the other vessels, the linemen that help us tie us up. And so I really just, I always have a radio and a cup of coffee. It's kind of pointing to my company, but really that's what I did. I mean, that's all I do is I drink coffee and I talk on the radio. And one of the reasons like I'm not hands-on is the ship's 40 to 200 feet wide. If you're going to dock something like that, this, you can't do it from the steering wheel. You got to be out on the bridge wing. You got to be out on the edge of the ship when you're docking. And so it would be really impossible for me to actually put my hands on the throttles, as they say, to operate the ship. So I just give commands to the helmsman who controls the rudder, and then I give commands to the mate who controls the engine, the EOT, and then me and the captain. Sometimes the captain's involved. He wants to know how we're meeting other vessels, and he wants me to paint him a little bit of a picture if he's not sure. But 9 out of 10 times, I do a little interaction. He tells me a little bit about his ship so that I know what I'm driving and what I'm stepping into. And there's some information that I need to clear bridges or make sure I don't run aground, maybe steering characteristics, stuff like that. We call that a master pilot exchange. So I have a master pilot exchange so that I know information about the ship. And then usually they go to sleep, they'll do paperwork. And it's understandable too, because, to get to Baton Rouge might be 24 hours from the sea buoy. So you can't expect the man to be on the bridge the whole time.
Yeah.
Some of them do. Some of the captains, they'll sleep on the couch on the bridge. For the most part, they go back and do paperwork. And then when we go to dock the ship, he'll come out and, he'll be a part of docking. But
Wow. Okay.
yeah, it's kind of interesting.
And what's it been, about 5 years you've been doing this?
Yeah, I started training in 2020. So I guess it's been four full years, right? 2020. I finished in 21.
Yeah, so full 4 years. We're in 25 now.
So right at
4
4,
years.
starting into 5.
Okay.
It's been 4 years. Yeah, 4 years of me being on my own. I did 12 months of an apprenticeship. Yeah. And then I've been 4 years by myself.
So besides the understanding everyone's accents, what other, any kind of interesting or funny stories that you have, or just any kind of wild stories that you have?
Yeah, I mean, there's one time I almost hit a bridge, which is a big no-no in our industry. if you've seen any news about, bridges lately.
Yeah.
One thing that people don't know too about this industry is like, if you talk about that Baltimore issue where they took out the bridge, that dolly ship that took out the bridge, everybody speculated that, oh, it was a terrorist attack. Oh, it was this, it was that. The week that ship hit the bridge, we had 5 ships have this not identical failure, but the same type of blackout. And ships black out. There's a lot of ships, so it's not like a lot of the ships on the water are blacking out a lot. It's just, it happens pretty often. So I've had ships lose power completely. Luckily, I haven't had anything beyond, a very stressful couple hours. But yeah, one time I was coming down on a bridge. I was on a loaded ship, so I had about 45 foot of draft. One of the things that makes our pilotage kind of difficult is the amount of turns and the speed of the current. A ship only, you can only control a ship if you have water deflecting across the rudder. The only way you can do that is to move the ship forward through the water. Well, if the current is doing 4 or 5 knots, the ship has to move pretty damn quick for the rudder to actually work. And so it was a pretty normal day. We're coming down in an area called Geismar or Grandview, and there was a line tow. And to paint a picture of the type of tow this was, he had almost 10 acres of barges in front of him. We'll say he had a solid 8 acres of barges in front of him. And so this guy's he's not very maneuverable. He doesn't just get out of your way. He doesn't do anything fast. And if anything, his job in certain times is extremely difficult. He can't just stop, right? That's another thing about ships. Like, it's kind of, when the current's doing 4 or 5 miles an hour, pretty hard to stop this thing.
For sure.
It could take, you know, I've seen 180,000 ton ships or 120,000 ton ships take 2 miles to stop. And that was going with the current. I mean, going against the current,
Going against the current, yeah.
I was going against the current and it still took me 2 miles to stop, right? And so I'm coming down on the bridge. I'm probably like 10 miles from the bridge. The line tow is in front of me. And we had already made passing agreements where I'm going to overtake this guy before the bridge. Well, as we're coming down, there is an anchorage off to the front of us, on the east bank, and there's like 4 ships in the anchorage. Very normal, like no big deal. Well, we're just coming down. It's a bluebird day, like nothing crazy's happening right now. I'm just gonna overtake him before the bridge, and we're gonna go through the bridge single file. Well, the ship at the very bottom of the anchorage breaks loose and just pulls out. It wasn't under power. The anchors failed, and the ship just pulled out in front of the tow. And so now for this guy to not hit the ship, he's got to pull out in front of me. So if you could imagine him just pulling towards me and like cutting my water off. And so there's nothing we could do, right? He's trying not to hit the ship that's in the anchorage. I'm trying to not hit him. And at the same time, I'm trying to not hit the bridge pier. And it's one of those moments where I remember coming down and it was like, I'm definitely not hitting the bridge, right? There's no way I'm hitting the bridge. So I'm like, I'm just going to have to take the front end of this guy's tow off. The front end of his barge is off. And I think I was 40 or 50 feet from the bridge pier. And when I looked off the stern of the ship as I'm overtaking the front end of his tow, I looked off the stern and I couldn't see the barges, or I couldn't see the front end of the barges, meaning like he was right underneath me. But a saying that we have in this industry, an inch is as good as a mile. And he didn't hit me. I didn't hit the bridge. It was extremely stressful. I remember like not talking on the bridge for like 30, 40 minutes as my like blood pressure came down.
Yeah.
That was one incident where you could see it from 30 minutes out. Like I knew like as soon as that ship came out, I knew what the tow in front of me, the line tow was going to do. I knew what he had to do. And I knew that meant like, he's going to cut my water off. I for like 30 minutes, I'm like, man, this isn't good. This isn't good. This isn't good. I don't know if that's more stressful than the other side, which is it's a bluebird day and like, bam, something jumps out in front of you, which is probably more of the stressors that I get.
Yeah.
I was taking a ship from just north of New Orleans in an area called Kenner Bend and come out of the anchorage, and we were going to go like 4 miles and we were going to go into a dock. And it was a very congested morning. Tows were everywhere. There was a lot of ship movement, and there's a small, I guess it was probably Chinese crew or Filipino crews, language barrier there, right? That's actually one of the big troubles is there's a lot of language barrier. They have to speak English, but that doesn't mean they speak very
Good English. Or understandable English.
Yeah. And you get a lot of head nodding. Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, not yes. Like, is it, did the anchor drop? Yes. No, I don't think you understand me. Like, what's going on? Yes. And you're like, oh my gosh. Culture differences that are kind of funny. But yeah, so I'm on this ship and it's very congested. There's a lot of tows running back and forth. I'm going upriver. I got a really large ship that's going to overtake me. And then so that we're not too abreast coming around the point. He's going to overtake me. So I'm trying to set up for that. And I was on probably a 40,000 ton ship and he was on a 150,000 ton ship. He was a much larger vessel. And those are, when you get really big, they handle really well, but you move a lot of water and they don't move very fast. So there's a give and take there. And I'm coming up and I was telling I was talking to a couple of tows that were doing some work on the bank, and there was a bunch of traffic coming down. Made all my passing arrangements. I told the tows that were doing the work on the bank, like, hey, I'm going to get really close to you, but y'all just keep doing your thing. I just want to make sure you know I'm there. Well, these tows are coming down, and I go into the back of the wheelhouse. And imagine the wheelhouse is a 130-foot room that's probably 20-foot wide. And it's just got a bunch of radars and a bunch of electronics and communication systems. And it's a big office at the same time. Well, sometimes a radio, there's always radios up forward, but sometimes I'll turn a radio in the back on another channel so that I can kind of hear what's going on in another area. Or if I need to talk to the tugboats, I switch channel. Well, I remember looking out the window, and I'm like, everything's good. It's tight, but everything's good. I told the helmsman to hold it in a straight line. And I went into the back, into the chart room, and I'm fiddling with this radio for 30 seconds. And I just remember the captain screaming, Mr. Pilot, barge, barge. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but he sounded, distressed in his voice. So I popped through the curtain, because there's a curtain between at night. This is at night, and there's a curtain on the chart room so that they can have light on the chart room, but not have too much light so you can see. What is it called? It doesn't matter. So I come through the curtain, and all I could see in front of the ship, you can't see the top of this boat. He's underneath my bow. He's so close that I could see the very front end of his toe, like his bar. It was a light push boat. It was just a push boat. So he wasn't pushing any barges. He was just the boat itself. I could see the very front, and then I could see the prop wash, the water from the back of him. And I knew I was running him over at that moment. Because if you could have just imagined not being able to see something in front of your car, and you're doing right.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to stop this thing. I wasn't going very fast, but I was going fast enough that if I hit him, I could potentially be killing the 5 guys that are on that boat. Yeah, so I stepped through the curtain, I said a couple of profanities, I went hard over, stop engines, and I just started screaming at this guy on the radio. And I mean, I don't know how, but I ended up not hitting him. And I'm not a smoker, but I remember everybody's lighting up cigarettes, and I'm like, yeah, I'll take a cigarette. I need a cigarette right now, because it was, I don't know if I'm explaining the severity of that moment, but it was essentially there was 1 second where everything is fine and dandy, and then within 10 max, 20 max seconds, I'm killing 5 people, and I'm about to cause at least 10 million in damage. Primarily, I'm going to kill these guys. No telling what this is going to do to my career, right? So it's there's a lot of, not that any
happening.
of those things. The only thing that went through my head was, don't hit this thing, right? And do whatever you can to not hit it. So get on the radio and do everything you can on the ship to try to not hit it. Blow the whistle, get on the radio, scream. I was screaming at him. I didn't know who he was. I didn't have time to find out who he was. So I just started screaming in hopes that everybody was going to pick their head up. Luckily he did.
Wow.
It was so funny too. I went hard over, stopped my engine, which when you stop your engines, it doesn't help going hard over. But if I'm going to hit him, I don't want to be going full blast on him.
Sure. Yeah.
So I stopped my engines, went hard over, screamed at him, blew the whistle, got her back under control. And now I'm shaking, and I'm trying to get this guy on the radio, and he never answered the radio. He's he knew what he did. And so I called it. I even called his office. I was ratted on him. But either way, it was fine. I mean, other than, the 3 years of life that I lost from the stress in that moment, it was,
For
no
sure.
harm, no foul. But it's kind of interesting. It's sometimes it takes 30 minutes that you're just watching this train wreck from a really far place.
Mhm.
And then the other times, which is more often, it's more often than not, they pop out of nowhere. And emergencies happen. And
yeah. Well, this has been truly amazing hearing about you, hearing kind of your life, your story, your journey. And it's not over yet. And we've been talking for quite a while here, but I kind of want to talk about the shirt you're wearing, Backbone Coffee.
Yeah.
So, what I've learned about you, Chris, is that you're somebody who's a hard worker. You've had people in your life who've influenced you who are also hard workers. And if I'm not mistaken, you and your some other associates of yours came up with Backbone Coffee Company kind of for that type of person, the hardworking person who's, putting in those 12-hour shifts like you are and has to have that coffee to keep going. Tell me a little bit about Backbone Coffee before we end up here.
Yeah. So me, my business partners, Brandon and Cameron, we were spearfishing buddies. It's kind of how our relationship started. And I drive ships. Cam worked in the plants here on the Mississippi River, and Brandon was working offshore, still work offshore as an electrician. And I think so. I was on this long journey to become a pilot, and I acquired that goal, and then I was in a season where it was like, okay, I achieved that, and that's awesome, but like I don't really have anything to focus on anymore. So I was in a season where I was like, I was looking to bring value, and I was looking to do something in business. I'm an excellent operator when it comes to the maritime and the commercial industry. But I never started a business. I didn't really have a whole lot of experience in it, and I felt like that was sort of the next thing for me was to start a business. And I didn't really know. I didn't have an idea. I didn't have an idea of like what do you do? And not only did it's like I didn't really just like want to have an idea. I wanted to bring value somewhere. And there's two folds to this story too, like for why I started Backbone. One was to like I wanted to start a business. I wanted to bring value. I didn't know where that value or what that business was going to come to, like in the beginning when I was hanging out with Brandon and Cameron. And then the other side of it was I had this idea that's not original to myself at all about what generational wealth is. I've got 3 kids, hopefully more to come. And there's a I guess a philosophy of what generational wealth is that I really stuck to, and that was your ability to create wealth, your ability, but it does. I guess this is the way that generational wealth was described to me that meant the most was it's not the zeros in the bank account that you leave your kids, but it's your ability to create wealth, your ability to teach how to create wealth to a generation. And then the third step was your ability to teach how to create wealth and then teach how to create wealth, right? So it's not just the money, but it's your ability to do it, to teach it, and to teach how to teach it. So I'm sort of, and I'm still on that journey of like how to build wealth and how to like run a successful business that produces some sort of value to other people. So either way, that was like the headspace that I was in when Cam came to me and kind of pitched the idea of like, really, he didn't even pitch the idea. We were sitting at dinner and we're always talking about business a little bit, like what's the next $1 million idea, and sitting at dinner and Cam, he was driving some city a couple days before dinner and he's like, man, I was driving and I saw a big old crane that was building this skyscraper, and he just had the thought, like, I wonder if the world really recognizes what the crane operator does, and does the world think about that crane operator, and does that crane operator who builds America, right? I mean, that character who's going to work every day, like, is he getting the representation in society that he deserves? And I was like, I don't know, that premise of like, how do we bring recognition to the people who are building America? And I have honestly no clue how coffee got involved. Coffee was just Coffee, one, we were always drinking coffee. I mean, like I said, it's in our hands every day. And then we kind of just pitched around like, how do you bring recognition to America? Like, what companies are doing it? And so we went from there, and we were like, what if we start a company that brings recognition to the people of that are building America, one cup of coffee at a time, and bring them affordable, delicious coffee and recognition for what they do. Just be a good part of their morning. And I think that was the initial idea. Like, now we're bringing a product that people love, and hopefully in a way that represents them really well. And from there, like, we literally were at dinner and we're talking about it. We did a 3-day archery shoot in Broken Bow, Oklahoma. And the whole way there, we're talking about like how we could do this. And then when we got back, my uncle ran a roastery out in Seattle. And then Max, who you've emailed a couple times, like, he was a friend of ours. And we flew to Seattle, figured out how to roast coffee, figured out like what the coffee industry looks like, how to bring a really good product. I mean, obviously it takes more than one visit to Seattle to roast coffee, by the way. And then yeah, we just started on like learning how to build a business, and that's another thing. Cam and Brandon ran a tree cutting business together for a couple of years. They had sold it, and then yeah, I had zero experience. So everything from setting up QuickBooks to, how does Google Drive work? Yeah. So it's been, it, there's a lot of learning to do when you know absolutely nothing about a very large industry.
No, for
Which I
sure.
guess,
And that's what's amazing though about you, Chris. Here's this guy who dropped out of homeschool, got his GED, became a river. I mean, that's what's amazing. And now you've got, your backbone coffee company. You're running this business. I'm super impressed because for me, that's impressive. Someone like, and you're someone who's adventurous. Journey with Jake's an adventure podcast. It's about your journey. It's someone, when what you've been through, and you've been through a lot. I mean, your dad was in prison for tax evasion of all things. I mean, you've had some things, but you've learned how to work hard and you're learning something else. You're learning about coffee.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, it's been a journey, man. Yeah, it definitely has. And it's been fun. And I think the funnest part about the coffee too is that it's that next journey.
Yeah.
Is like, I accomplished commercial fishing, and that was a journey, and that was really fun. And I learned how to work hard. And then that next, I guess I'm also into like really long journeys, because it took me like 15 years to accomplish the pilotage thing. Hopefully it doesn't, well, I guess hopefully I can be doing this one for a long time, because
Yeah,
it's been
exactly.
fun. Yeah, hopefully this journey is a little different, but neither is the pilot. I'm not going to stop driving ships. It's too much fun.
Yeah.
It's way too much fun to stop. Yeah, it's still a fun journey to drive ships, and it's fun to have new journeys for sure.
So new things for sure. Now, so tell everybody, if someone's like, all right, this kind of fits right up my alley. I want to get me some backbone coffee. How can people do
Yeah,
it? Where do they go? Is there a website? Is there, where can
yeah,
they do this?
yeah. So right now we are 100% direct to consumer business, and you can go to backbonecoffee.com and you can get on a subscription. We can send coffee to your house every week, every other week, every month. And one thing I will like to point out about the coffee that we're producing, it is specialty coffee. It is very high end coffee. It is roasted to order. So we don't roast the beans until the order comes in, so the coffee is extremely fresh. And we worked really hard to make the process very seamless and very simple. And we're pretty proud of our website. But yeah, you just check us out online. Check us out on our social medias. There's always a link to, our website there. And yeah, it's until we're in grocery stores, that's the only way to get it.
That's perfect. And for anybody listening, who wants to get some of this coffee to try it out or whatever, I know I'm going to have a link that I'm going to put in the show notes. 15% off, I believe, 15% off. So, hey,
Yeah.
that's a good deal as well. So
Yeah.
we'll show that. Before we wrap up, Chris, my last question, I always like to ask this to everybody because Journey with Jake, we talked about your journey, some of your adventures that, with koonin for oysters and whatnot. But What does the word adventure mean to you?
Man, the word adventure to me means it's got to be difficult and it's got to be unknown. And so whatever that is, elk hunting in the mountains in a place you've never been is a journey. And learning to drive ships across the world is also a journey. It's just they're both difficult and they're both very unknown.
It's an adventure. I
think
love it.
That's a journey to me. Yeah.
Definitely, without a doubt. Absolutely. Chris, we've been going for a while. This has been awesome. I'm super impressed with you. I'm impressed with Blackbone Coffee Company and what you got going on. Thank you so much for coming on Journey with Jake.
Jake, thanks for having me, man.
A huge thank you to Chris for joining Journey with Jake and sharing his incredible story with us. If you want to learn more about Chris and Backbone Coffee, visit backbonecoffee.com and follow them on Instagram at Backbone Coffee. Also, don't forget to check out the show notes or my blog post about this episode at journeywithjake.net/episode 156 for an exclusive 15% off Backbone Coffee. Big thanks to Chris for sharing that with our listeners. I really appreciate it. And of course, thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in and supporting Journey with Jake every week. For those of you watching on YouTube, I appreciate your patience with the video quality in the first half of this episode. I'm still getting the hang of YouTube side of things, so thanks for sticking with me. Next week, we have another fantastic episode featuring David Shaffron. David was deep in the rat race when he realized something was missing. He needed to dance. That's right, dance. And he didn't just dabble in it. He took his passion for salsa dancing all the way to Medellin, Colombia. It's an inspiring story you won't want to miss. Just remember, it's not always about the destination, as it is about the journey. Take care, everybody.